second time to present Mapping the New Normal. As we know, we are all in a completely new terrain, remote learning, distance learning, hybrid learning, in-class learning, all types of learning going on. So we have consistently making changes and shifting our thinking about best practices. And so MDTP does the same, and we are here to present some of the things, the ways we're thinking about supporting educators this spring, specifically into using MDTP, and also as you move through your next year and determining where students are and meeting them where they are. So my name is Kimberly Samaniego, and I am the director of MDTP. I'm the statewide director. And there are 4 UC offices and 4 CSU offices across the state that house MDTP. We have a few of the outreach coordinators and site directors here today who will be presenting and also in this session. And at the end of today, we will round everything out with a discussion forum. It's just an open discussion. If you have questions or thoughts or ideas that have a specific task that maybe during the session right now I might be posing, and if you have some thoughts for us, you can join us there for that. At 10 o'clock, we will be having breakout sessions, which at the end of this session, I will be talking about. So without further ado, just the last 2 minutes to make sure everybody gets in, I'll get started. Okay, this session is being recorded. So let's see here, making sure, I think we're at pause recording. Let me make sure to stop. Nope, it's recording. So it is recording. Just wanted to make sure you know that, first of all. So if you miss it, or if you have educators that want to see it, we will be posting all of the sessions on our website within the next few weeks. So in this session, what we're going to be talking about is defining a path and bridging unfinished learning. So the first piece about that we're going to talk about in this session, and then it's actually explored in all the other sessions more deeply, is thinking about when we want to know what, providing a pathway for students for success, we need to determine what is the math that students need to know, and we build on the strengths of what they know and what they need to know. So building the path means to determine the math that students already know, build on those strengths, determine the math that students need to know, and to be successful in the next level. And that's one of the reasons we're focusing on using MDTP in the spring now, because we want to think about readiness for the next level as we're ending this year. And then we want to map what we learn in the data. We want to map the common errors back to misconceptions. So this is the part about determining how we get them where they need to be. We need to understand what they know, and then we need to intervene on some of the pieces that might be hindering them from success. Then once we learn what students know, we want to build a bridge. We want to have them access the math, right? So some of the suggestions we'll be providing will be to embed mini lessons, to address misconceptions, to bridge the learning of the math on the defined path. This is, it could be just in time where you've learned something and you're going to do something right before instruction. And I think, Carol, your session talks about that quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And I have, in my session, I have some pieces on that too, as well as the other, Kate's session is specific about interventions of MDTP resources to use to do that. Another thing to think about is making learning transparent to students. One of the things that we do really great as educators is we scaffold our lessons. We create these beautiful lessons, and we make all the designs so everything works out. So when students see us present what we think is a really good lesson, at the end they get an aha. But sometimes we don't always share with students those steps in the aha moment to get them from what we were thinking and how we were thinking to develop a concept or skill for them, or a process. And then at the end, it's for some students, they might not get that aha. They might just get like, was that math magic? So this is the thing, that being really transparent about what we're doing with students. It also means being transparent about what students know. So you say, I learned from data that students know this, and I also learned that we might have this misconception. So this is why we're doing this. So students have an understanding about why we're doing what we're doing. That's in the research to show that's really helpful for students to make the bridge. And then one of the things that's very important is learning over time, is mastery learning and retention. Part of building a bridge is to to provide multiple opportunities for students to master over time. This can be thought of in spiraling and distributive practice. I'll talk a little bit about that in the end of my session. So the first thing that I'm going to do is talk about the MDTP assessment system, so the pieces that we offer. Now, this is really an informative keynote speak. I'm going to push a lot of information out. If you have some questions, we do have a full staff here to answer if you want to put them in the chat. We have people monitoring the chat and they can be answering questions for you. So feel free to pop those in. I likely am not going to answer questions from chat. Anything that might not be answered and is not answered in the other sessions, I welcome you to come back into our forum at the end at 11 o'clock. So the MDTP assessment system is free. So everything we do, we are grant funded through the CSU UC systems to provide everything that we do for free for California secondary educators. And so this means providing you testing, online access, online testing, providing you written response items, providing you with training. We aren't actually coming out to sites right now, but we will meet virtually with people. And when it's safe to gather again, we do meet with teacher groups, professional development training. We will come out and work with teachers for free. So everything that we talk about, we offer free of charge. We start with our assessments of preparedness. So these were in the past called readiness tests. And we changed the name because these are assessing if student is ready for the grade level mathematics. It's not readiness for a grade. So these are assessments of preparedness of the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade mathematics. And we start in grade 6. These can be administered for students exiting grade 5 and going all the way through students exiting grade 7. And then as they come in. So I'm talking in terms of spring implementation. If you were going to be giving this in the spring, you would want to be giving your grade 5 students the preparedness for 6th grade, if that makes sense. Then we also have course level readiness tests. So these start for Algebra 1, Integrated Math 1, and we go through calculus. So as students enter to an Algebra 1 or an Integrated Math 1 course, we have a readiness test for that. Students exiting an 8th grade Common Core mathematics would take that test, thinking about a spring implementation. We also have demo tests now. This is new. We have a lot of users who want to be able to assign a few problems for students. They always said, can you give us something to practice? So these are not a practice test because it doesn't have a full range of content, but the demo tests are 3 items that are aligned to the level of the assessment you might assigned your student, one of the 2 above, and that gives the chance for you to sign it. Students can take it and they can see the different modality of how to take an MDTP test. So it's like a practice run to get them ready to take the test. These are new and they're assigned just like you assign the other assessments. We also have written response items. I'll talk specifically about those in the next level, but this gives the opportunity for students to dig into a particular topic and demonstrate what they're thinking, their critical reasoning around that topic is. We also have 9th grade assessments, which I had to cross out. Right now, we are not, those are not available at this time. This might change. I still haven't changed that yet. 9th grade assessments are for students that are exiting 8th grade going into 9th grade. Were written in to help educators in supporting SB 359 expectations. But because they're meant to be proctored in person, we close them when there's a lot of schools still doing remote and hybrid learning. So we might not have those available this spring, but we do recommend that we have recommendations for an appropriate readiness test to use just for the same purpose. And if you're curious about that, specifically how to meet SB 359, which is the 9th grade placement act, then you might want to check out Emiliano's session at 10 o'clock. And he talks about that. That's what his whole session's about. So the assessments of preparedness and course level readiness tests are designed to measure students' preparation for readiness in the course that they're entering, or the course that's the next course. So they help us understand basically what students know, their competency in important topics and their progressions of towards college mathematics. So our vision is that MDTP supports math educators to support their students to be not only ready for college mathematics, but successful in college mathematics. So we do use the framework from the standards and the progressions to design MDTP tests. I added that piece in there because there's going to be a part in here about the CDE at the end of the this piece here. We give you tons of feedback, tons of data. The online testing is great. We drill into a topic, we drill into an item, and we drill into student response. And it's immediate. And we have done this so that you can learn about what students know so that you can design the appropriate instructional actions. And these tests can be administered anytime throughout the year. And right now we are only supporting online testing of these because we are not yet allowed back in our offices. So we can't score and we basically can't ship. We have very limited access, so we might be able to do some cases of a special need, but for most, we are recommending that everybody use online testing and your results are instantaneous, so you don't have to wait for us to score and get them back to you. Okay, written response items. Kate is going to be talking about those in her session today. And we designed these to engage students in a basically low floor, high ceiling task type of learning experience. They range in skill sets. They can be given across multiple grade levels, the same one, in fact, depending on whether you want to re-engage in it to address a misconception, or you want to reconnect to prior learning, or you want to push the thinking in something and assess what you're doing now and try to create more flexible thinking in your current content. These are range from middle school through calculus readiness levels. They kind of align to our readiness tests, and they do help to support your instruction in a focused topic. So MDTP's tests are designed around major foundational topics in mathematics. Talk about that in a minute. Importantly though, they give us more insight about what students are thinking, because it's they have to demonstrate their thinking, they have to write out what they're thinking, they have to justify, analyze, and describe on these. And so that therefore, it provides if I see something in a diagnostic test, I might want to drill into an MDTP test to learn more about what students are thinking, what they know in that particular topic. And they do come with a 0 to 4 point rubric. They are teacher scored, so you score your own, but this helps to support a performance assessment expectation if you were to use an MDTP test in that way, where students would receive a score and they could be analyzing how they're doing on that scores. So what I'm going to do right now is kind of talk real quickly about how you could use MDTP throughout the year, and then I'm going to focus on spring. So in this case, we do have a document that starts with students exiting 5th grade and goes through students entering calculus to give you which MDTP test you could use for that purpose and what time of the year. So I'm going to specifically call out students who are in the current course of Algebra 1 or Integrated Math 1. So when we see our students in the fall, what we would be wanting to learn is what is the readiness, their current readiness right now for the course. We could use this data for baseline data. We would identify their strengths, their misconceptions, and their gaps. We would use this data also to help inform how we are going to be presenting our content in our units and the content in our lessons. And we would give the integrated, or the Algebra 1 Integrated Math 1 readiness test. It's called the AMR readiness test to our students. Students who are exiting grade 8 could also take this test. I'll talk about that in a minute. In the middle of the year, if you noticed that the students had some topics that you really wanted to intervene on, specifically because if you didn't do something, they might not be able to access your current content, then you can give it about 2 to 4 months later the same test. That way you could check to see if whatever intervention you had implemented, if you could see some related growth to that intervention. Another thing to do is you could give the next level readiness test in mid-year. So basically at the beginning of the second semester, or however, if you're in quarter systems, however that works for you. And this would be now to see how are my students doing towards being ready when they leave my class. And this is, again, I'm gathering baseline data, and I could be working on still intervening on those misconceptions, but then also determining what gaps I have so that I can make sure that students are getting the content they need to be ready for that next level. And then at the end of the year, what you might want to do in the spring, which is right now, well, actually, maybe even a little closer toward the more of the end of your year, is you would give that same assessment, the geometry readiness or the integrated second year test, depending on if they were what pathway they're on, to let us know how students are really doing when they leave us. Helps us with our program design. How did we do in our year? And then what is the readiness level for the next course? And this is a really good way for us to even use it for planning over the summer to determine if we need to make any shifts in what we did in the current year, so that the next year's group might have a readiness maybe stronger. So we've gotten a few calls, emails, questions from districts since the last time I talked to you in March, and that was the CDC is now offering flexible testing guidelines for spring. So the most current thing I found on their website, and I did attend a webinar to see if MDTP could be used for this purpose. The first most important is that if they said if it's viable, that you should use the statewide assessment, but they have this statement that says, where a statewide summative assessment is not the most viable option, then you, LEAs, that's local educational agencies, schools and districts, may report results from a different assessment that meets the criteria established by the board on March 16th. And so these assessments must be aligned to Common Core state standards for math and English, language arts, and available to assess students in the grade levels in which the state and summative assessment is not the most viable option, so within grades 3 through 8. And so what they're saying is that if there's an assessment that's available for your students exiting 5th grade or going into algebra or whatever it is, you need to give that same assessment to all the students in that grade level. So a grade level assessment that can span all the courses, which I argue MDTP can do that, and uniformly administered across this grade span school or district, so that you could basically map how your students are doing on that common assessment is basically what they're saying. So I revised our planning, and we do have, if this is the first link, if anybody wants to put this in the chat on this one here, on our website, we are talking about how we could be using these assessments in the spring to meet the state's year-end diagnostic testing mandate. And they did, initially when I was looking at the research from the state, they were talking about being a diagnostic test. So therefore we are a diagnostic test, and so we do meet that mandate. If students exiting in the current course in grades 5 through 7, we recommend giving them the next level assessment of preparedness. For students who are in grade 8, you may want to give all of your students the same assessment, depending on whether or not they're already in an integrated math 1 or an algebra course, or you may want to break the assessments up based on the students who are in 8th grade Common Core math would take the Algebra 1 Integrated Math 1 readiness test. The students who are in Algebra 1 would take geometry readiness, and the students who are in Integrated Math 1 in the 8th grade could take the integrated second year readiness. And then for grade 11, students who are exiting your Algebra 2 course or your Integrated Math 3 should take the pre-calculus readiness. And the students who are exiting a pre-calculus or trig course should take a calculus readiness. So we do have these recommendations on our website. And if you decide that you wanted to use MDTP to meet your year-end testing mandate. So one of the pieces on the CDE is they say that reporting, you need to publicly report disaggregated data by student group. So we don't disaggregate. That would be up to the school district to do that, schools, which the districts I've talked to understand that. And then they also said the performance of students by assessment, the number, percentage of students tested and not tested. Additionally, they require that students be sent a personalized, that they receive the results. So MDTP has individual student letters that are available on our reporting system now. But in order for you to get them to each student now, you'd have to download each one by one and email it to the student. That's not going to work for this purpose. So we are in development right now, where we are creating the ability for you, a district or a school, to send emails in mass. So all of the student letters, you would have to do them by course, though actually by class. You wouldn't be able to do a whole district at a time. It would just, really would probably bog down our servers, so you couldn't even test your students. So what's going to happen is you would go in each class and you could select to send all those student letters by class. And that's in development. We should have that done within the next few days. Now, how that will work is we are going to add a new column to the roster. So now when students take an MDTP test, you submit a class roster or you type them in by hand. We're going to put a new column in that's optional. It's not, you don't need to add it, but it's optional. So it's up to the district if they want to add that information of a student email. For those classes that you may have already rostered and have existing this year, and you're thinking about using MDTP for this purpose, what we'll do is you could add a new roster, and as long as the student ID is the same, it will replace the data of just the roster data to keep the same student name and ID number, but it will add now their email address so that you didn't have to go in one by one to re-roster and assign students in case you already have a classes entered. And then another thing that we are going to do is, because it says that MDTP has to be aligned to standards, is we're going to map topics to standards, and that's in progress. Mm-hmm. So you could be getting a progressions map of seeing how the topics of MDTP map from grade level to grade level. So that's in progress. So this is what we're doing. Like I said, we are always trying to become flexible so that we're usable and helpful for you. So that's what's in progress. And what I had said initially is, if you have a question about this or thought about what kind of a standards map you would like to see by topic, we won't map item to item, but by topic. And if there would be a way that you'd like to see that data presented in a report status, you could join me at the discussion at the end today and maybe give us your thoughts or help us think through that, because we haven't started it yet. But we will be soon, and I know that Carol and Pat will be working on that. So I see their faces are like, yes, let's do this. Okay. So just to recap about the resources that we have, and then I'm going to get a little bit into the diagnostic data. We're still doing good for time. This is a full document that has starting from grades 5. It's loading very slow. There we go. Loading from grades 5 all the way through, exiting grades 5 all the way through all the courses. So I only looked at Algebra 1, but this tells you everything. So this document here, somebody would share that document in the chat. Let's get back here. This can be useful for any course that you go from students exiting 5th grade and through entering calculus. Then we also have a really nice document that we created to help schools use MDTP to inform their next course enrollment options. This is the placement word. And so we have some ways to do that. And this document here, place this in the chat, will also be used by Emiliano in his presentation at 10 for the purpose of this is basically the whole content of his presentation. So if you're interested in how to do that. We have a very, very robust and fantastic webinar series. Everything that I have here also I'm showing you is on our website. So if one of you want to just type in mdtp.ucsd.edu, that's the website. We created a whole series of webinars to help the educators in remote learning starting in the fall. So Carol and Pat, myself and Terry Gibbs, we all made some presentations and we have about 6 here. So if you ever wanted to go back in and just take a look at some of the webinars, these are 30-minute sessions with about a 10-minute question answer at the end. These are all here for you to use for your reference. So I highly recommend checking these out or sharing with your educators. And then the last piece that I have to share right now real quick is our newsletter. This one came out in the spring or just about a few months ago, and this has everything that you need to know about what MDTP is doing and all our links and everything to support remote access during distance learning, the tests that we release and whatnot. So these are some really great resources for you to use right now. All right, so let's get into a little bit about diagnostic tests and what you can learn from MDTP, and then I will describe what the sessions are coming up, a little bit about each one of theirs. So we design a diagnostic test to measure student thinking in a way that you don't have to do it by looking at their paper responses. So we design each of our items where the distractor will illuminate a way of thinking for students. And we design these around the important prerequisite skills that students need to be successful in the course that they're in or the course they're promoting to. We use the data to identify student strengths, what they know, unfinished learning, and then potential gaps of content knowledge. So let's take a peek a little bit more. Our diagnostic results drill down to 3 levels of formative value. You can look at a cohort of all of your course results. So this tells you how your class is doing in foundational topics. This is used to inform your first steps in course and unit planning. Then you can dig into an item analysis. So you can look at an item. This helps us look at the class strengths in an item, unfinished learning and gaps. And this we can use to inform our lesson planning, and then determine whether we need to re-engage or intervene. And then you can look individually at an item, drill into each of the different options to see which students know which, and then this can help us determine if we need to look at intervening in a whole class or perhaps differentiated learning experiences, maybe small group or one-on-one learning experiences. So at the first level, the class readiness level, this is a topic results in an integrated Math 1 course. This is at the beginning of fall. Students came in, 35 students came in, and we will look at the topics. So this is the Algebra 1 Integrated Math 1 readiness test, and it has 8 topics, and we look at the item count. So if we look at the first topic, data analysis, probability and statistics, there are 5 items in this topic. If we want to know if a student is ready for the items in that topic in this course, we look at a critical level. So critical level is what MDTP has determined to be the minimum number that a student should get correct in order to be prepared in that topic. And so then we notice how many students meet critical level, and we also look at the % of students who meet critical level in each of the topics. And one thing we could use this for is to think about what are we teaching next. So we want to be focused on our next unit. So perhaps we're going to be solving linear equations. So we might want to look at fractions to see how students are doing in fractions. We might want to look at integers, and we would want to also be looking at topics, the linear topic. We would look at those items to help us think about our planning. So if we drill into one of the particular topics, we could see how the items line up in that topic, the performance. So then we might think, okay, here's the topic that 57% of the students got correct. Is this a strength? So we would think about what does it mean to be a strength and how we could build on those strengths. And then we might look at the items that they had the least performance, and we might think, is this a gap? Are these in the middle, unfinished learning? How do we think about that? So right now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some common language, and it's going to be used in the other sessions. Strengths. This is items that most students answered correctly. Unfinished learning. I think about this in 2 ways. I think about it as a misconception, and I think about it as what looks like an informed guess. So when we see a misconception, that's very easy for us to determine. These are items that a large % of the students chose the same incorrect option. That's a common misconception, something we can intervene on. We can map back and determine what to re-engage students in. Then there's what looks like the students are guessing. And this is where all the items were chosen somewhat evenly. I'm going to propose that they're not really guessing. What has happened is that some sort of, we see this a lot in procedural problems. There's a process that students have learned or have memorized, and part of that process resonates with them. And so they'll see something that will, in the process, that they'll recognize, and they'll choose that. And it will be different parts of the process that they will see a piece like, oh yeah, maybe that's it. And so they will be using an educated guess basically to choose that. And we call that unfinished learning. Then gaps. These are items that we look to see that students omitted at a high rate. Since MDTP is a diagnostic assessment, students are, at the beginning of each test, they are directed not to answer an item that they have to guess on, because that's going to ruin your diagnostic results. If they have seen the content before and they've learned the skills before, then they should attempt the problem. But if they have not, they should leave it blank, and that indicates that that's a gap for students. So let's look at these specifically, a couple problems together. So what integer is closest to 31/7? And we're thinking this is a problem. Determine the solution. So right now, go ahead and do this math. And then think of ways that students might answer this question, this problem. And you can use the chat to share the solution. So let's go ahead and what integer is closest to 31/7. So I'm gonna let my monitors tell me when I get like 4 or 5 people have answered in the chat. Okay, it looks like
a lot of 4s.
A lot of 4s. Okay, and so how do you think students might answer this problem if they didn't get the correct answer? What are you thinking? Maybe a couple. So we have a couple of different responses, 5s, some other ways of like thinking, 5 because it's in the mid-30s. Okay, all right, so here's the actual results for this problem. So I'm going to take us one by one how we look at this. First, we want to see what percent of, remember there's 35 students, what percent omitted. So 9% is about 3 students who omitted this problem. And next we look at, so for those students, this would be something they don't feel comfortable to answer. This is question 4, by the way. Everybody's seen the problem, so not seen and omitted is different. 57% of the students got this answer correct. So for these students, we consider that to be a strength. 20% chose 5. That's what you were putting in the chat. They chose 5. So this is a misconception that is likely can be pretty easily brought out in a re-engagement activity. It wouldn't have to be taught. We wouldn't want to teach this as if students have no knowledge. It's not a gap. We wouldn't want to reteach this concept. We would actually want to build on this. And then also notice that we have a few students that chose 1 and 3. So we would classify this as a strength since most students answered the problem correctly. And then we would use this strength to build on in our lessons. We wouldn't teach it as if they had never seen this before. Here's another problem. This one's a lot of fun. This is question 17, and last one's question 4. Determine the solution and think of ways that students might answer this problem. So if you want to use the chat, and first you need to figure out what the solution is. I'll give you a minute to do a little math. And when you're ready, go ahead and type in the solution in the chat. Get some of those. See a few responses.
We have some 11/15s, so we have a lot of 4/15s.
Okay, all right. So what do you think? Let's think now as a student might answer this. let's put a few, what do you think students might answer? What solutions do you think? So if we were writing the distractors for this question, what are good distractors? What might be a common misconception? See, 5/8.
Mm-hmm. 1/3.
1/3 times 2/5.
Mm-hmm.
Some are estimating, seeing, making an estimation of what it kind of looks like. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to reveal. So on this particular item, notice that only 2 students omitted this question. So even more felt comfortable with this question than the one on question 4. But do notice that only 31% of the students got this answer correct. I'm going to also argue that if they got another answer, chose another answer, that their thinking is similar. So we also notice there's a big misconception here of 3/8. What are students doing to get 3/8? Give you a second to type that in. What is that misconception? That's right.
Yeah.
And they are only adding, notice that they're only adding the numerators and the denominators of the unshaded region, right? And we're looking to find the shaded region. So that's also 2 pieces there. First, they are adding numerators and denominators. And the second piece is that they actually aren't answering the question. If you notice though, students, if they chose the answer D, then answer D was to do the correct math, right? Of adding the 2 unshaded regions together, but it was incomplete processing. We didn't answer the question. And if they answered C, question C, then they did the same math they did to get the 3/8, but then they subtracted from 1. So then they did complete the question. So there's different types of things going on with this problem. This is a misconception. This is how we would say this misconception, because a large number of students chose the incorrect option. Now, I did have another item on here that was an actual potential where they were evenly distributed, but because of time, I took it out because I wanted to share the stuff about the CDE. But I'm pretty sure that Carol's going to talk about that, and probably Kate will talk about that too. Okay, let's see here. So the next thing we do is we looked at some data. Now let's define the math for the path. So determine the math that students know and build on those strengths. Determine the math that students need to know to be successful in the next course, and map errors back to the misconception. So I'm going to do a quick little idea about what that looks like in terms of mapping, and then I'm going to announce the sessions, because then they're going to actually dig into some concrete examples of what to do with that. I'm going to go back to this items, and I'm going to say, what do students know? So I'm going to ask these questions. I think it's really important that we recognize that students come to us with a lot of learning. They know a lot of math. They've had math for many years before they get to us. And it could be that we need to direct re-engage into making the connections in a way that makes sense to them. So what students know, the first thing we'll notice is that 77% of the students know that 31 divided by 7 is between 4 and 5. That's a strength, right? So they picked 50% and 20%. So that's one thing to know. What do they need to know? Well, they actually need to be able to correctly articulate this number. And so we can look at that there's one student, if they chose A, and if they chose B, they might need a small group or one-on-one intervention. And then of course, we want to check in with those students that omitted it, right? So to think of where they need to go. And then where do they need to go? Where can we actually use this in this knowledge in our current classes? So when we're talking about slope, we can use this concept, right? We're embedding it in the current content. If we are even in a pre-calculus class, we can talk about what does it mean when we're using a mixed number and we're converting radians from degrees to radians, and also want to maybe what's the terminal angle? Where does it terminate? In what quadrant? So we could be talking about things like that. And then mapping the error and defining the misconception. That's a big deal. So we learned that in grade 4, going back to the standards, that students recognize that 6/5 can be written as 6 times 1/5. So we know in grade 4, they're talking about this concept of a improper fraction. The misconception is that students obtain 4 3/7 and then interpret 3/7 as more than a half if they're choosing 5. So that's just something that we can address in re-engagement strategies, talking about in a number sense, which is something that the next sessions do. On this particular item now, this is one we talked about. Students actually know quite a bit and when they choose each of these distractors. 40% know how to add fractions with unlike denominators. That would be A and D. That's a good portion of your students know that. 6% know to subtract the area of the shaded region from the whole area. What do they need to know? Well, they definitely need to know how to add fractions with uncommon denominators. And so if they chose D, that's a one-on-one intervention, because what they didn't do is they didn't subtract, right? But if they're choosing A and B, then if they're choosing A and B, then they are actually, that's not correct. If they're choosing, it should say B and C, then we need to actually intervene on the idea about how to add with uncommon denominators. That's just a typo on my end, sorry about that. I picked that up last time. And then where do we embed this? Solving system as the equation is a great way to be adding fractions together. Interpreting areas, perimeter, volume. We don't have to give them nice, pretty whole numbers. We can give them fractional pieces. Adding rational expressions. They actually need to know how to add numbers with uncommon denominators, because in irrational expressions, we have to make the denominators the same. Partial fractions, decomposing partial fractions, and even simplifying trig expressions. So this is where we think about where this needs to be embedded. Here's the error. So in grade 5, students learn how to add and subtract fractions with uncommon denominators. In grade 7, they apply and extend previous understanding of fraction operations. And then as we move into the standards, we really don't see anything about fractions again until rational numbers and then partial fractions in calculus. It's there, students still need to do it. It's just not really called out. So we need to keep that in mind. This misconception, adding the numerators and denominators to find the unshaded region to be 3/8. Okay, so I'm going to actually just talk very briefly about learning and practice. So I actually don't have time to do this. I will bring this up in the breakout and at the end of the session. Right now, what I want to do is talk about our breakout sessions real quick, because I know they all need to get into their rooms. I have about 2 more minutes. So we have 4 sessions to get to. So the first set, not that there's any order. This is how they're kind of presented on our flyer, is with Carol Treglio, and Carol's still here. And Carol's session is to use MDTP diagnostic results to bridge unfinished learning. So Carol says, in thinking about student readiness for the next course, we'll consider the area of focus for that course and the prerequisite skills needed for success. We'll use diagnostic readiness data to tell us where students are aligned to the defined prerequisites, and then plan strategically to bridge 6th through 12th. So Carol's saying this session is for students currently in, well, I think exiting grade 5 also, but 6th through 12th, because this is our secondary courses. Emiliano, he is the site director. Carol's the outreach facilitator for the San Diego region. Emiliano is a site director for the Berkeley region. Emiliano is going to be talking about using MDTP to inform equitable course enrollment policies. So this is to learn how to use MDTP with a focus on equity and access to high-level math. It addresses the mandates of the SB 359 and is applicable to any program that requires a policy for enrollment. So in other words, if you're trying to determine where to enroll students and you have to create a policy, this is a really good. It talks also about statistical implications of using any kind of a measure to enroll students in a course, basically the placement word. Actually, I forgot to change the picture. I'm so sorry, Kate. Kate's on our flyer. I just didn't do this. So Kate Riley is the San Luis Obispo site director, and she's going to be working with Pat. Will be there in the session, but they're going to be using MDTP learning modules and response items to bridge unfinished learning. So you're going to be exploring the 2 free resources available from MDTP and the components of each, which are the modules, MDTP learning modules and response items. And these are going to be appropriate from 6 through 12, the response items cover, and the learning modules we really recommend for grades 9 through 12. And then I'm going to have a session on exploring the idea of big ideas in context of a course that I taught this summer for, I taught at UCSD a bridging course for students exiting high school coming into our at UCSD. And it was a bridge to basically a pre-calculus. I'll share my strategies and how I used MDTP to think about my, my learning experiences to design for the students and the outcomes of that. So and at 11:15, we will have our open forum discussions. So everything that we talked about, I offer for free, and you can find our assessments here. This presentation, again, is recorded, and the session presentation will be posted on our website, so you can have all those links. And I went 2 minutes over. I am so sorry, but it gives you a few minutes if you want to go run, get some